We're finishing up our fourth lecture on the European Renaissance. We're going to be traveling to Northern Europe to see how the Italian Renaissance shaped and transformed uh, the Northern Europeans' art movements and literature during the time period, as well as see the effects of Johann Gutenberg and his printing press. It's going to take about 100 years for the population of Northern Europe to begin to start growing again after the Black Death and the Hundred Years' War. Now, remember, we talked about the Hundred Years' War being between England and France, but that doesn't mean that a lot of the periphery countries are choosing sides or sending guys in there and having that conflict affect them. So it's going to take a while for Northern Europe to get back on track from the effects of that long 13th century that we talked about, where Italy is still affected but less affected. Those Alps act as a pretty good barrier to keep the Hundred Years' War out. During this time period, as we talked about before, we've seen the growth of cities during this period, particularly on that back end as we start to get into the 1400s. We see the growth of cities in Northern Europe, where we've already seen a pretty urban society in Italy, particularly Northern Italy. And like we saw in Italy, as those cities begin to grow, people begin to make extra money in those cities. What are they spending their cash on? These wealthy urban merchants are sponsoring arts. And particularly where we begin to see in the Renaissance period of Northern Europe is the area in and around Flanders. Flanders is modern day Belgium, northeastern France, and they're going to make a ton of money from cloth production. They're going to be taking a lot of the raw wool from Flanders, from France, particularly from England, and turning that into cloth. And so they're going to be making a ton of money from this, which they're going to be able to then go and spend money on art to be able to drive the art movement in Northern Europe. Like we saw, Northern Europe is also dominated by powerful rulers. Those rulers are making money as well, so those rulers are going to become sponsors of the arts as well. We don't see as powerful political figures in Italy. So Italy, the Italian Renaissance art is very much driven by urban merchants to be able to flaunt their wealth. And again, Northern Europe has rulers as well, so there's going to be a little bit more political messaging in the art of the Northern Renaissance than we see in some other places. Not totally, but a little bit working its way in there. And what we saw again with this whole idea of the Italian Renaissance, with the Renaissance itself trying to go back to classical Greece and Rome. The Italian Renaissance is where the spark of the Renaissance is going to begin, and as the Northern Europeans begin to integrate the ideas from the Italian Renaissance, they're going to kind of go and create their own little branch off of it, their own little flavor of it. So the Italian Renaissance ideas are going to mix with more Northern traditions, and I want to say it's more of a focus on realism, not so much photorealism or anatomical realism, but more realism of everyday people. So we see less as we move into the Northern Renaissance paintings of stuff from the Bible or stuff from the classical past, but more paintings and art of real people doing real things. And when we get to some of the examples, this will make a little bit more sense to you. So the region that's going to drive, particularly start the drive, is going to be the area of what's called Flanders. Again, that's modern day Belgium for the most part, a little bit of northeastern modern day France. So that's when we're talking about Flanders. They're going to be famous for the cloth that they're producing that everybody's going to want to wear. The Northern Renaissance art, a lot of the techniques and styles are going to flow out of Italy to the rest of Europe. So Albrecht Dürer, who's German, is going to be a pretty good example of the Italian Renaissance techniques and ideas coming out of Italy into Northern Europe. As a German, he is going to go and, as a young man, leave Germany, study under the Italian masters in Italy. I forget which one of the big guys that we talked about. It's like Raphael or Michelangelo, or yeah, one of those two is like teaches Dürer, or he's at like their school. So he kind of gets kind of their flavor in there. So he sees does a lot of religious subjects, does classical myths, and some realistic landscapes is what Dürer is known for. Now his woodcuts and engravings are hint, winks, and nudges, kind of what he's known for. This is where you're carving into a block of wood the picture, almost think of it like a stamp, and then you can go off and stamp out 50, 60, 70 copies, then break that stamp over your knee, throw it in the fire, and it's never going to exist again. So from an artist standpoint, a woodcut is nice because you can make more copies of it. You have more art to sell. Once you're done carving out, you can just go and make 1,000 copies and do that. So it's going to be very almost prohibitively expensive for any of you guys here. But you're more likely to own a Durer woodcut today than you would be able to get like a Picasso or a Da Vinci or something crazy like that. Hans Holbein the Younger is famous for his portrait paintings, and so a lot of the famous people that will be showing, particularly when we get to the Reformation part of this unit, will be done by Hans Holbein. He's known for his realistic paintings. We'll be able to see the dirt under his fingernails. We'll be able to see the wrinkles in the face, the fur on the cuffs and collars, and that's what he's doing. That's what Hans Holbein's known for. Jan van Eyck is a very famous Northern Renaissance painter. He's famous for the paints that he uses, and he's one of the first to experiment with and use for most of his art oil-based paints. So he is known for his use of color, and we'll see that in hint, wink, nudge, his Ghent altarpiece. And when we look at this, and hopefully you've seen this in your Renaissance art web quest, the brightness, the vibrancy, the vividness of the colors he uses to get his point across in his painting. So Jan van Eyck is known for his oil-based paints. Peter Bruegel the Elder is another painter, and when we go back to that previous slide idea of the Northern Renaissance being focused on realism, this is what we're talking about with the example of Peter Bruegel. He's very much focused on realistic people, less on portraits of the rich and famous, and more on scenes from everyday peasant life. What is a realistic situation, a realistic event that a quote normal person, an average person, end quote, in the Middle Ages would be experiencing, and that's what we get out of the works of Peter Bruegel the Elder. So again, just like how we did for our Italian Renaissance artists, I would know a couple examples of these works. Hopefully, again, you've done some of these for your Renaissance art web quest. So I know a couple examples of the works they did. So like Jan van Eyck, you should know he did the Ghent altarpiece, and then again, Albrecht Dürer did woodcuts, Holbein portrait paintings. That's the kind of stuff we need to know for our quiz. So this is a famous woodcut done by Albrecht Dürer. We know it's a woodcut because it's black and white, right? To be simple, again, think of it like a stamp. Again, the realism of this, we again, this is called Night, Death, and the Devil. So pretty simple and easy. You can see the muscles of the horse, all right? The light shining off the knight in shining armor, the fur of the dogs. But again, when we talk about Italian Renaissance influence, this is a great use of perspective, right? The town is small in the background because the town is far away. The knight has a long way to go with death on his side and the devil behind him, right? So that's what we see here. This is this is Saint Jerome, done by Albrecht Dürer. So again, the same style of the woodcuts. Albrecht Dürer does a lot of other paintings and stuff as well. He's got a pretty painting of a little bunny rabbit that I like. But this is his Melancholia #1. But again, he's famous for his woodcuts. So that's where we're going to end engraving. So that's the examples that we're showing you here. So those are all Albrecht Dürers. Hans Holbein, again, is famous for his portraits. This is his Erasmus of Rotterdam. And again, we want to focus on the realism of it, the fur on the cuffs and the collar, right? The wisps of hair. If you zoom in on the Renaissance Art web quest, you can see the dirt under his fingernails. You can see the individual pages on the book. So again, showing northern influences from the Italian Renaissance on realism here, looking for a portrait of this person. Holbein does another couple of other things as well. This is another famous portrait that he does, playing with this idea of realism and playing with this idea of you only have a finite amount of time on the earth. We usually like to do this in class and say, do you know anything unusual about this painting? And usually we get a pretty good couple of people saying, well, what's this? What's this rug here? This is, again, Holbein playing with the idea of perspective, because if you go and look at this painting straight on, that just kind of looks like a rug, kind of a paint smear. But if we move to the right, it's going to go and look like a skull. So again, playing with the use of perspective there from Hans Holbein. This is the Ghent altarpiece. This is done by Jan van Eyck. And so again, the vibrancy, the vividness of the colors in his oil-based paint is what we want to get out of this, right? The greens of the grass, the blues of the sky, the red of the clothing here very much is vibrant and vivid. This is an altarpiece. This is the triptych. This is in for the cathedral in Ghent in modern day Belgium. These are wings, these are doors on the side, and these will close when Mass is not in session. And when it's closed, it's very much browns and muted colors. And then when you have Mass, this opens up and you're flooded with all this light and paint and color, which is kind of the idea of what he's trying to get after here. Famously, this was stolen by the Nazis during World War II. And if you've seen the movie The Monuments Men or read the book, the United States Army is going to go try to hunt this down to stole it back, to get it replaced back in the cathedral. This is Hunters in the Snow. This is Peter Bruegel the Elder. And so what we see here in Peter Bruegel's painting is this idea of realism. This is everyday peasants. And so what we see here, you can kind of almost feel, this is, I mean, usually we show this video in and around January. You can kind of feel the cold in the classroom. You can feel that bite of the frosty air. And you can see that these peasants have gone out, they've gone hunting, but they're tired. You can see, you can feel those dogs panting. You can hear their breathing. Their tails are down, right? They're going, their heads are down. They're tired. We see a couple rabbits, so not successful. So this scene here in the foreground really kind of like the push and pull of survival in the wintertime, but yet you can almost hear the snap, crackle, and pop of the fire. And then when you swoosh down the painting, and again, this is a pretty big painting in real life, you can see all the stuff that's happening down there. So if you're watching this on your phone or on your computer screen, it doesn't do it justice when we blow it up in the classroom. And you can see the people ice skating and the little girls playing on the ice and what looks like curling or ice hockey and all the stuff that's happening there. So this is what peasant life during the wintertime would be that Peter Bruegel is trying to go and capture. And so when we say realism, that's what we're going after in this particular idea of the Renaissance. Writers, like we saw with Italian writers and writers of the Northern Renaissance, Northern humanists become more critical of the church to inspire people to live a more Christian life. This criticism the Northern humanist has leads to an idea of what's called a philosophical idea of Christian humanism. And this is a reform of society through education. If people are smarter, they're able to read the Bible, understand for themselves what the Bible is saying, and then be able to take those ideas from the Bible and apply that to their own life to live not only good Christian lives, but also be able to reconcile the push and pull of living your life here on earth versus setting yourself up for eternity in heaven. And so that's kind of this idea of what Christian humanism gets into. The big proponent of this is Desiderius Erasmus. He writes out of Holland. His famous book that he writes is The Praise of Folly in 1509. And he's very much pushing not so much a true reform of the church like we'll see, let me do the math, 8 years later in 1517 with Martin Luther, or what we saw with John Wycliffe and Jan Hus. But Erasmus, working within kind of the church system, says Christianity is very much a religion of the heart and not one of rules or ceremonies. So Erasmus is pushing the idea that if you can't get to church every Sunday, it's not the end of the world. You shouldn't be punished for that. Because again, as long as you're being a good, faithful Christian and you believe it in your heart that Jesus is your Lord and Savior, that everything should kind of work out for you. It's not so much focused on correct practice and correct dogma, but correct beliefs is what Erasmus is working towards in his work there. Thomas More is an English writer, and the famous book that he writes is Utopia. And this is an imaginary world with zero problems. So More is trying to create a better model of society. So he's not writing this to say this is how everything should work. He's trying to think of a world that has zero problems and everyone lives with peace, harmony, and you're singing Kumbaya on the beach with people of all shapes, sizes, colors, and creeds. So he's not pushing for this. He's looking for an idea of this is a perfect society. What can we do as humans to work our way closer to that? So that's kind of what utopia is all about. And again, as consumers of media and stories over the past 25, 30, 50 years, we've seen movements in literature that talk a lot about dystopias. So we take a look, usually I say the same, you think of a utopia in movies or stuff, and we get a whole hands up and say, Zootopia, Mr. Cranmer. But again, the whole point of the movie Zootopia is that it's not a utopia, that there is problems. That's like the whole basic plot point to that movie. Spoiler alert, right? So that's what he's trying to go and get after in Utopia, where again you get a lot of dystopia, like the Hunger Games movies, or a lot of different stuff that you see. Usually, you pull back the curtain and there's horrible abuse, and that's what we've been seeing, which is the opposite of what Moore's writing in his work. Christine de Pizan is another writer from this who is very much an educated woman, much more educated than we see for, quote, the average, end quote, woman in the Renaissance. In her writing, she very much questions the different treatment of boys and girls. Why does it have to be this way? Aren't girls can be the same thing? Very much laying the foundation for subsequent women's movements to kind of build upon taking some of her different ideas. So this is Desiderius Erasmus. This is a Durer work of Erasmus. We already saw a Holbein portrait. And again, that's his work, The Praise of Folly, where again, Erasmus talking about the idea of Christianity as a religion of the heart, not one of dogma and practice and being there on church every single Sunday. Thomas More's painting here, that's another Hans Holbein portrait of More. And again, from the cover page, that's More's Utopia. There's the title of it. All right, that's the figure, that's the drawing, which he then goes explains throughout all his writings. More is going to be a big player in the Catholic Church in England, and he's going to play a big role in the Reformation in England. When we get there, we start talking about the Reformation part of this. Christine de Pizan, again, writes a lot about the different treatment of boys and girls and why girls are being treated differently. And then what you can see in this one, she's reading, what, 5 books at one time here. I like to make the joke, so make sure you're sitting down when you hear this, that Christine de Pizan does a lot of writing in France when she's living in there for most of her part, but she is from de Pizan, from Pisa, so she's from Pisa, so she's French and she's Italian, so she's 2 types of salad dressing. All right, so that's the joke that I had to come on the screen for. Pretty solid joke. All right. The other big writers we see, particularly in England, are going to very much be supported by Queen Elizabeth I. We'll talk much more about her later on in our unit following this. But Elizabeth is going to reign in England from 1558 to 1603. She's well educated, and she's very much going to be an English, a patron of the arts in England, very much going to sponsor English art and literature during her reign. And the big person she's going to go and sponsor is the playwright and writer William Shakespeare. And he's very famous for his English writers of plays. He's so famous that, again, if we asked you anybody on the study guide, usually when we pass this out, has any of the freshmen heard anybody, they're going to say, well, I heard of Shakespeare, because I know you're going to read Romeo and Juliet during your freshman year here at Joliet Catholic. Shakespeare's going to use a lot of classics for inspiration and plots. Again, he's literally got plays titled Julius Caesar. He's got Antony and Cleopatra, and then again, those are just a couple of them. He uses that, so he's going to kind of not reinvent the wheel, but he's taking some of these famous people from history, like a Caesar, like an Antony, like a Cleopatra, and kind of embellishing, dramatizing the history. And for a lot of people, the history of some parts of Rome, some parts of the Middle Ages, Henry V, they know more from Shakespeare than they know actually from the history books. So again, like we said, he's going to be the Renaissance writer with the most far-reaching influence. The freshman boys know who William Shakespeare is, so that should again tell you a little bit of how far-reaching he is. He's going to have a masterful command of the English language. He's going to invent turns of phrase. Usually we pause and say, does anybody know a Shakespeare quote? And we'll get, does a rose by any other name smell as sweet? Oh, Romeo, Romeo, where art thou, Romeo? Or if you remember, even from first semester with Henry V. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. He who sheds his blood with me upon this day shall be my brother, and let all the men back in England be accursed. You get the idea. Again, for the freshmen, we'll have a whole Shakespeare fest at Joliet Catholic in May, where the AP English classes will be putting stuff on there because of how big Shakespeare is at Joliet Catholic. So he's going to be famous for a lot of different plays, so you should be familiar with some of these tragedies. He's going to do Macbeth, Hamlet, Othello. Denzel Washington just starred and was nominated for Academy Award for one of the Coen brothers did a Macbeth recently. If you've seen the movie The Lion King, then you've watched Hamlet. The comedies of Midsummer's Night's Dream, and then histories Henry V, Richard III, Richard III's famous horse, a kingdom for my horse, towards the end of that particular play. So those are all pretty famous ones. Yeah, you should know a Shakespeare play, you should know a Hamlet, you should know a Romeo and Juliet. So that's a portrait of Queen Elizabeth. This is a portrait of William Shakespeare. Maybe, again, it's one of those classic history things where this is what someone thinks Shakespeare wrote. Look like whether there's a little bit of scholar debate if this particular painting is Shakespeare or not. But again, you should know some of these ones. These are all pretty famous uh, uh, plays that Shakespeare does. Caesar, Merchant of Venice, King Lear, Taming of the Shrew. If you've seen the movie 10 Things I Hate About You with Heath Ledger, that's basically Taming of the Shrew reworked. Um, that The Tempest, I've got a big Forbidden Planet poster in the classroom. That's basically the play The Tempest, but set in outer space. Hamlet, Henry V, Othello, Richard III, Macbeth. So lots of different examples there. We're going to finish kind of switching gears here at the Renaissance and moving away from just Renaissance arts and writing into what helps spread these ideas in the printing press. So that's where we're going to kind of finish up with this part of the unit with the printing press. Now, the printing press does not just come from Europe. It's the Chinese who are actually going to invent the idea of what's called block printing. Block printing works in a couple different ways. You want to go make a book, right? This is how to do well in Mr. Cranmer's class. So you want to start that. You start off with page one. Page one is a book. Is made of wood, and you go and you carve in, and this is importantly, in backwards, in reverse, the words and letter on that block. You then go and you ink that block up. Then you go like a stamp, and you go and you stamp that out on a piece of paper. You print out, you stamp 1,000 copies. Then you go and you throw away that piece of wood, and you bring out the second piece of wood for page two, and then you keep going until the book is done. So that works fast, right? Because again, you're able to go and print out as many pages as you want, but you still have to spend all that time carving each individual one of those pages. And the drawback is if you're not going to make another copy of that book, that all that work that you did to carve out page one, page two, think about how many pages are in your textbook, how many pages are in the Bible. It's a little bit time consuming and again inefficient. So in 1045, Bicheng invents what's called movable type, where instead of going and carving all of the pages of the book on wood individually, so think about 1,000 stamps for 1,000 pages book, you're going and carving out different pieces of character on a piece of wood. So one small piece of wood character then is a single character in that language. So then when you're done with page one, you print out 1,000 copies. You don't have to recarve out page two. You just move all the letters all around again to form all the stuff for page two. So that's great. That's wonderful. Much more efficient. The problem is, and we talked about this going all the way back, is that Chinese writing contains thousands of different characters. So this is more efficient, but the Chinese writing system complicates things, and it's a little bit more efficient, but you're still not gaining the efficiencies, the time savings that you would be for a language with smaller amounts of characters, say like in English. So movable type is invented by the Chinese, but it's impractical due to the limitations of the Chinese system of writing that they have in this time period. So this is block printing. So block printing, again, think this is all you're doing is making a stamp here. So we want page one of this book. We have to go carve out page one, right? Just how we want it into a block of wood. We then ink it, and then we go and we stamp it out. Well, that means that if we want page two, we then need to recarve all of page two. So Bi Sheng says, well, I can do that better. So let me go and carve out individual characters on pieces of wood. Then I can go and move those characters all around, and I've now sped the process up a little bit. It's less inefficient. It's more efficient, I guess is the better way to say it. It's more efficient, but because of the limitation of the scientism of writing, it still doesn't explode in the way that this should be as a revolutionary invention. So some of the oldest things that are printed that are still around today come from Asia. So this is printed, this is from 1377, printed in Korea. So this is the oldest known example of movable metal type. Um, and again, so this is 78 years before we'll talk about Johann Gutenberg in a second. And so we see stuff already being printed, but again, the limitations of this, of the language itself, keep this from exploding out there. And again, we get stuff like this. This is printed, all right, on there. So you can make a ton of copies of this, but think about all the time and effort that went into making just this design. So block printed items start to reach Europe. So this idea starts to kind of get in there. But again, block printing is too slow to meet the demand for knowledge. So we're getting more books made, but it's still very much a bespoke. It's still very much an expensive limiting technology until about the 1440s. Johann Gutenberg comes around in Germany. Now, caveat, Johann Gutenberg might never have existed. He might have been a cover name. He might have just been a figment of people's imagination of a couple different printers. Might have been a real person. With the actual real live Johann Gutenberg is waiting for someone to do a intense historical study on. Not a whole lot of sources, but that's what we get. And what Gutenberg does is he's going to develop a new printing press. And like the best inventors and most famous inventors that he has, his invention that's so life-changing isn't just invented out of thin air. He takes a couple of different ideas that already exist and combines them to make a technology that's quicker, that's cheaper, that's more efficient. We'll show you a picture of these different things. So the first thing he does is he creates a screw press. So when you go and you pull on it, it's going to act as a screw and push the um, printer and the blocks into the actual page. If you were to go and again, if you had gloves, you could still do that. But if you were to go and touch a Gutenberg book, you'd be able to feel the indentations in the page as the press is pushing into the paper. So he has that. He has movable type. So each different character can be moved around and rearranged. This is where we get the terms uppercase and lowercase from, because capital letters would be held on the upper shelves or the uppercase of a printer's book, and the lowercase letters, or it would be on the lower shelf, the lowercase. He goes and uses paper. Europeans have been using animal skins to write most of their books, vellum. Again, this we usually ask the question when you graduate, what do you receive? It's not the diploma, Mr. Cranmer, it's your sheepskin, because that's what these were printed on in the Middle Ages. And that's expensive because you have to raise an animal and then go and kill it. And think about, I mean, I've got a big mole on my neck, I've got moles on my head. If we're skinning Mr. Cranmer to write on, you have to write over that mole. Think about your classic traditional cow has got black spots and white spots. I've got freckles on me. If you're going to skin me to write on me, you've got to go and deal with that on these different animals and imperfections. He's also using an oil-based paint, right? Whereas again, we saw with oil-based ink with oil-based paints, a little bit more vibrancy to put out there. So the first major thing that he creates is the Gutenberg Bible is first printed. And that's going to be the work that puts Gutenberg on the map, that allows him to be able to go and do the things that he wants to do. You can see a Gutenberg Bible in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. You can see one in the National Library of Great Britain in London. And there's like 20 or 30 other copies that are floating throughout the world that you can go see if you want to go and hunt one of these down and see the remaining ones in there. So to finish up, what are the effects of the printing press? And this is a big deal, hints, winks, and nudges. One, books are much cheaper. How much cheaper, Mr. Cranmer? Capital letter cheaper. If it's cheaper, you're now able to get these books into more people's hands, more people can learn, and more people can spend their time in learning, and more information can be disseminated and get out there. You can codify and fix handwritten copies of titles. So what does this mean? Well, if one monastery only has Aristotle chapters 1, 3, and 5, and another monastery has chapters 2, 4, and 6, you can put all those chapters together and run them off 1 million copies, and now all that stuff in there. Remember, a lot of these books are being written by hand, and knowing from you guys, when you're copying stuff, you make mistakes, right? Particularly if you're a monk and it's 2 a.m. and you're writing by candlelight and all you've had is beer to drink because water is going to make you sick, right? There's mistakes that are made. We get the if we did the Renaissance art web quest and you did the statue of Moses, this Michelangelo did, you might have noticed that Moses has horns because some monk writing in the 300s, 400s misinterpreted the translating the Bible from Greek to Latin and said that Moses had horns. So for about 1,000 years in Europe, Moses had horns because of how he was in there. So you can go and fix that. There's the famous Naughty Bible of England where printers went and when they were doing the Ten Commandments section of the Bible, they put "Thou shalt commit adultery" and forgot a key word in there and ran off 1 million copies. Well, you can go and get that and fix that and run off 1 million copies so your corrected version is out there. Level of productions goes and increases by the year 1500. So this is just roughly 50 years after Gutenberg's printing press. There's now 40,000 different titles in Europe and over 20 million copies. And a lot of big words we're about to put here. We see the major effect of the printing press is the democratization of reading and the creation of a mass audience of the printed word. We see in the United States where we have something like 98% literacy, where everybody can go and read. So what does that mean? That everybody can go and read, everybody can get information, and more importantly, people can make a living from publishing stuff to go and read, whether it's your blog or it's your reviews of movies or other stuff. There's stuff that you can write and you can print out, and there's a audience out there for people to go and consume that. So this is a portrait of what Gutenberg could have been. Again, this might not exactly have been what it looked like, but that's what we see here. Here's an example of a Gutenberg Bible. And again, we'll show you in a section of this, but we can kind of see this very much looks like it's been printed. You can see the different columns. You can see how the letters are almost individually spaced. We have a little bit of artwork and interpretation in there, but again, you can see how much clearer and neater that is versus trying to decipher. I mean, look to your left, look to your right, your neighbor's handwriting. Again, if you go and you put your fingers over this, you can feel the bumps in the page as this screw press is literally being pulled and pushed, paper being pushed into the words. So again, we've got our movable type. We put the Bible in there, we ink it up, we put it in there, you pull on that, and you do that. With the printing press, this makes everything faster, cheaper, quicker. So you can now go and write out the news of the day in, say, a newspaper and deliver it and do a morning copy, an afternoon copy, and an evening copy. And then again, we're going to see the exponential rise of the printed word from this, where basically we have no books in Europe in the 1400s. By the time we get to the 1700s, we've got all the books, 1 billion of them, and it only gets growing and moving from there. So we'll stop at the Renaissance, and we'll see how the creation of the printing press is going to affect the political and religious way of life in Europe as more people can get their hands on people questioning what the Catholic Church is doing.